I've told you before stories from the life of Frederick Bedecker. He's one of my heroes. In fact, some years ago, I had I commissioned an artist to do a painting of Dr. Bedecker, and you can see from this painting some of the prisoners that he ministered to in Russia. He's dressed for the winters in Russia. A remarkable story, but I want to tell you just one story about a visit to Finland. And I'd like to highlight this scripture for you, taken from Proverbs 18, verse 21, which says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." And I found in life that this is certainly true. Generally speaking, in any given day, not saying one or two things that I might feel I had the right to say, and going out of my way to say one or two things that I don't have any obligation to say, can make all the difference. And this is a story about the influence of just a word or two and how it impacted Dr. Bedecker's ministry in Finland. He tells the story about a very special woman, the Baroness von Wrede, and you can see a picture of her here. Her father was a very influential man in Finland, and she was quite sickly. And in order to encourage her, he said, "Listen, you have to look after yourself, and if you can strengthen yourself, I will give you one of my estates where the prisoners who have been released, who are looking to change, looking to be industrious and to make a change in their life, they were free to come and actually work on the farm," and so on. And so way back this is the 1870s, she was actively engaged in very positive changes in the prison system there in Finland. And in this story we read that he made one of his earliest journeys there in June of 1887. And let me just read a paragraph or two here. "University professors frequently interpreted for the doctor. On one occasion, when a professor was translating, the convicts stood in their ranks respectfully listening, a set, stony look upon their faces. It was plain that they were quite unmoved. On his next visit to the same place, the doctor was accompanied by the Baroness. He had not proceeded far with his address before the moist eyes of the listeners and the convulsive twitching of their features told him that the arrows were sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. 'How is it?' he afterwards inquired wonderingly of one of the officers in attendance. 'My former appeal they heard with indifference and even resentment. Today, the word has found their consciences and hearts. Where lay the difference?' The prison officer's reply was significant. 'The difference, sir, was in the translation. When you said, 'my beloved friends,' or 'my brothers,' your clever professor invariably translated the expressions 'prisoners.' But the young lady translated it into Finnish as you expressed it in German, 'my beloved friends' and 'my brothers.' The key that opened their hearts was the human compassion and affection. They are not used to it," he said. You know, I used to visit a little school that was a failing school. It was very difficult, poor area, and the parents very often didn't feel capable of helping the children with their academics. They'd come for sports events. They would support the teachers and the administration if there were discipline issues, but they just didn't feel that they were equipped to help the students with their schooling. And it was a failing school. Well, a new principal arrived. And as he assessed the situation, he noticed that the teacher who was appointed to greet the students when they arrived was very interested in the children coming up to standard, so to speak. And she would say things like, "Who dressed you this morning? Your shirt is out, or your bow is crooked," or whatever it might be. She would give them these little correctives and admonishings as they walked in the door. He saw another teacher that had a very different approach to the children. And he said, that teacher that I found at the door, who was giving the first impression to the children as they arrived that they really were not up to standard and needed to smarten up, she was the best teacher, actually, to put in the cafeteria, where we had to process all of these hundreds of children in a very short time. But there was another teacher that was much better to greet the children in the morning. "What a lovely dress," she would say. "Look at this handsome fellow. Look how he walks like a soldier, his shoulders back." And she would speak all kinds of words of encouragement to the students arriving. And I saw the difference. I saw the change. When I first arrived there was a kind of morose mood over the school, a discouragement. But soon everyone was cheered up and positive and encouraging, and it wasn't long until the school began to feel the effects. The teachers felt it, and the students and the parents, and it soon became a successful school. So when the scripture says death and life are in the power of the tongue, I know there are people who perhaps make too much of this. Just the same, it is possible to see beneficial effects on the lives of people around us by simply speaking words of comfort, words of affirmation, words of reinforcement. And I trust that the Lord will encourage us to do that. We don't realize sometimes what a either negative or positive effect we can have on those around us. To say to a child who has failed, "Next time, try it this way." In other words, while you're correcting them, you're also telling them that they have a future. That you're not telling them that failure isn't final, and that the next time things can be much more positive and successful. And so God help us to do this in our marriages and with our children and with our neighbors and friends, to become a positive influence. Are there times when we need to correct? Yes, but we can do it in such a way that people are encouraged to want to change. There's a difference between criticizing and admonishing. Criticizing is telling someone where they're wrong, but admonishing is telling them where they're wrong in such a way that they're motivated to make it right. So, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it, in other words, those who love using their tongues for the encouragement and blessing of others, will eat its fruit. There will be a sweet result from investing positive, sound, encouraging words in the lives of others. Encourage one another, says the scripture. And may the Lord help us to be a positive and encouraging influence in the lives of others, and make it a practice of being thankful, of being positive. I used to think of my old grandfather, and when you met him, he always began, when you asked him, "How are you doing?" he'd say, "Lots to be thankful for." And when you said goodbye, he would say, "Well, we'll hope for the best." Sweet fruit for those who practice this positive, encouraging way of using our tongues and encouraging those around us.